We will now resume with our agenda, beginning with the Committee on Governmental Relations. Trustee Norton, will you please convene the committee?
Will the Committee on Governmental Relations please come to order? I note that no one has requested to address the committee during the public comment period today. On today's agenda, we have one consent item and one information item. The consent item is the approval of the minutes of the July 2017 meeting. Any objections? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the state legislative update, and this is an information item. Vice Chancellor Garrett Ashley will introduce the report.
Thank you, Trustee Norton. The legislative session concluded last Friday, and no additional work will be carried out by the legislature until next January. This year's session operated under a slightly different timeline than in years prior. Due to the voter-approved Proposition 54, bills must now be in print for 3 days prior to action on the floor. This change meant that rather than see a flurry of last-minute deal-making in the last day or two of session, the last 3 days of session were somewhat calmer and focused on counting votes rather than last-minute amendments. With the legislature's work concluded, more than 700 bills now await the governor's signature or veto. Of that total, 3 bills are CSU sponsored and several more involve or are relevant to the university. Director of State Relations, Nicole Munoz Murillo, will provide an overview of notable developments in Sacramento in the final month of the session and give an update on legislation that could impact CSU. Nicole?
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Ashley. I'd like to begin by noting some of the significant work accomplished in Sacramento this year. The legislature and governor worked to pass major legislation in 3 of their top priority areas: housing, transportation, and cap and trade. As part of the housing package, the legislature put a $4 billion bond for affordable housing on the June 2018 ballot, as well as passing several bills aimed at streamlining affordable housing construction. They also came to agreement on a transportation bill that is expected to raise $52 billion over the next 10 years for the state's transportation infrastructure. Finally, they came to a bipartisan agreement to extend the cap and trade program until 2030, which will ensure that California will meet its greenhouse gas reduction targets by that date. While our Office of Advocacy and State Relations does not necessarily track bills in these subject areas, we are engaged in conversations and advocacy around the transportation and cap and trade legislation, as the final agreements for each included funding for research. We will continue to work with our Chancellor's Office colleagues to identify and communicate opportunities for the CSU and campuses to access these funds. I will now provide a legislative bill update. Your agenda item for this meeting is organized to first report on our sponsored bills and then report on those bills that are still active in the current session. In the past several weeks, the appropriation committees have considered the suspense file, which is a holding place for bills with significant fiscal impact, and both chambers considered hundreds of bills on the floor. I am pleased to report that our board-sponsored bills, which you can find on page 2 of your agenda, have successfully moved through the legislative process and are currently awaiting action by the governor. AB 422, which permanently extends the CSU's authority to offer Doctor of Nursing Practice degree programs, received nearly unanimous support through all committees and both houses. I want to acknowledge the work of our campus leaders, staff, and faculty who greatly contributed to the bill's success. In particular, I want to thank San Jose State President Mary Papazian and Jody Hironaka, Dean of the College of Health and Human Services at Fresno State, for having served as witnesses when the bills were heard in policy committees. Working with our campus partners, we have secured more than 80 letters requesting the governor to sign the bill into law. This support has come from a wide variety of organizations and individuals, including hospitals, healthcare providers, local chambers of commerce, community colleges, campuses, and our own DMP alumni. The alumni letters, in particular, are personal and compelling. This coalition of support demonstrates that the benefits of the bill extend well beyond the CSU. Moving to AB 819, the CSU is one step away from having permanent authority to draft and adopt our own regulations. As you may recall, several versions of this bill have been introduced over the last 20 years, and each time the legislature has extended the authority, but always included a sunset date, ostensibly as a means of reviewing the actions of the board and the CSU. The final bill that moved to the governor does not include a sunset, and we believe in part is a reflection of the responsive and transparent manner in which the board and the CSU have operated. So congratulations to you all. Finally, SB 363 addresses a technical issue related to a small number of bank accounts used for study abroad programs, and we hope that it will be enacted to ensure access to study abroad opportunities in certain developing countries. Let's now turn to key areas of higher education policy addressed by the legislature this session. During a presentation earlier this year, we previewed a number of higher education issue areas that we thought were going to receive heightened attention from the legislature. As expected, we saw several pieces of legislation related to immigration and DACA, food insecurity, college affordability, Title IX, and California's Master Plan for Higher Education. In regard to immigration and DACA, we were engaged with several bills that supported our undocumented students and employees, including SB 68, outlined on page 3 of your agenda item, and AB 21, found on page 5. The CSU supported both of these measures, and they are now awaiting the governor's final actions. Additionally, in the last few days of session, a deal was announced between legislative leaders and the governor to appropriate $30 million to assist DACA recipients. 2/3 of the funding was directed to immigration legal services to ensure DACA recipients have access to legal guidance, and 1/3 of the funding for financial aid for Dreamers, including $2 million to the CSU for the Dream Loan Program. The CSU supported both of these efforts, and the governor has already signed this bill into law. The issue of college affordability was a strong interest of members, as evidenced by the passage of legislation to address basic needs and college cost. Two examples of the interest and basic needs of our students are AB 214 and AB 453, which you can find on pages 5 and 6 of your agenda item. AB 214, sponsored by the California State Student Association and supported by the CSU, will increase CalFresh participation among eligible students. It was signed into law by the governor in July. AB 453 was introduced for the purpose of encouraging universities to provide various programs and services intended to reduce student hunger. The issue was a high priority for several members, and so the language of the bill and funding were included in the final budget agreement. Specifically, the CSU received $2.5 million to help campuses with one-time implementation costs, such as establishing a food pantry or meal sharing program. I should also note that the legislature moved several bills to the governor's desk that aim to make students more aware about the total cost to attend college, including student borrowing and cost of living. Two of these bills, AB 1064 and AB 1178, can be found on page 7 of your agenda. A third area of interest has been Title IX, with two notable bills being SB 169 and SB 331, which you can find on pages 3 and 4 of your agenda. Consistent with the CSU's efforts to prevent sexual assault, we are pleased to support both of these measures, with one, SB 331, already being signed into law. SB 169 is now under consideration by the governor. Finally, you may recall that there were several bills introduced this year that would have made exceptions to the differentiation of mission outlined in the 1960s Higher Education Plan. The legislature's ongoing interest in updating the original plan has resulted in the Assembly forming a select committee on the master plan. Chaired by Assemblymember Mark Berman, the committee held its first hearing at the end of last month. Fresno State President Joe Castro represented the CSU, and along with the leaders of the other higher education segments, provided perspectives about California's master plan. We anticipate that the Select Committee will hold several more hearings over the next year to examine the master plan and the future of higher education in the state. While the primary purpose of the Select Committee is to take an in-depth look at a particular issue, it is not uncommon for legislation to emerge. We will continue to engage and monitor whether any bill ideas result from the work of the Select Committee. I would like to close my comments by looking forward. As previously mentioned, all legislative activity is concluded for the year, and the governor has until October 15th to sign or veto bills passed by the legislature. During our next report, we will include an update on the governor's final actions. Meanwhile, our office is already beginning to prepare for 2018. We have begun our annual process of soliciting each of the 23 campuses and the Chancellor's Office for 2018 legislative proposals. Consistent with our legislative principles, we will be looking for legislative ideas that enable us to better serve our students, improve the way we operate, and ease unnecessary administrative burdens. We are also already hard at work on our advocacy plan for 2018. We are working in conjunction with our system-wide budget office to develop a robust budget advocacy strategy that makes a strong case to the legislature and governor for necessary investments in the CSU. We are also continuing our strategic advocacy efforts to create awareness of the significant contributions of the CSU to the state. This fall and into the new year, we will be engaging key policymakers and staff through campus visits, briefings, and informational hearings. Trustee Norton, that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nicole, for your report. Are there any questions for Nicole? Yes, Adam.
Thank you, Nicole, for the excellent report and all the hard work up there. You may have mentioned this, but just two quick questions. SB 318 on the bottom of page 3 and AB 848 on the top of page 7. They note that they're in suspense. Did the legislature end and they were still in suspense, or did they move?
There's updates on both of them. SB 318 did move to the governor's office. It is something that we're asking for a veto for. In AB 848, we were able to have the bill amended, so we were actually able to go back to a neutral position. And so that's going forth also to the governor's office. It's been enrolled.
So on the first, we're advocating with the governor's office?
Correct.
Jane.
Thank you. Thinking ahead to the next legislative year, and thinking back to the discussion about the budget yesterday, I'm reminded that in the sustainability report, which was done a couple of years ago, there was a section on kind of regulatory relief that seeking some changes from some of the perhaps old laws that become burdensome over time might be a good thing. Could that be looked at in the context of developing the legislative agenda for next year?
Absolutely. And we do ask all of our campuses and our campus leaders, as well as the Chancellor's Office staff, to come up with bill proposals. And I do know that those discussions are already happening, and I would imagine we will be getting some of those.
Yes, Trustee Carney, thanks for bringing that up. There were a number of items in that original report that asked for exploring legislative changes that would help the CSU, and a number of those were followed up with by the Sacramento office, and we've had some significant changes. But I think it's worth looking at it again and doing that assessment. Nicole and her team do a really good job of consulting with all the vice chancellors each year in forming that legislative agenda. So, but I think your idea is a good one. Let's take another fresh look at that and see what may have still not gotten done, or maybe things we should add to that. In addition to, I mean, one of the, I think, most significant things that was asked for in that report was to get the law changed to give CSU much more flexibility on how it invests its funds, and of course that was done. There were other things that really had to do of getting kind of shifting workload away from, things that don't add value either to the university or the state. Some of those have gotten done, but I think we still have more work to do in that area.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, then that concludes the work of the Committee on Governmental Relations.